Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to 33 Founders. Chase and I are really excited to be with Caleb Elston today, the co-founder and the CEO of Delighted. Thank you so much for joining us, Caleb.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Can we start out with you explaining the solution that Delighted is providing for brands to connect with their customers on a meaningful level?
Sure. So Delighted helps companies get really useful and actionable feedback from their customers. Most businesses say they want to be focused on customers and hear from them and make sure they're building products that they love. And yet what we found is in many of the companies we've been a part of and in the companies we talk with, that they don't have a way to do that systematically. They may hear from people sometimes on Twitter or Facebook, or sometimes through support. Someone might give a piece of feedback, but generally it's just these ad hoc, once in a while kind of situations, and yet they want way more feedback. And so Delighted makes it really, really easy for companies to get this feedback from their customers with a one-question survey that happens in their email. So it's really fast to answer. It's great on desktop. It's really great on mobile devices. And then all that feedback goes into a dashboard where you and the whole team can see that feedback and then make improvements and see those improvements over time.
What's the one feature you're most proud of in the service so far?
There's a lot, obviously, that we love. But I think that the thing that's really valuable is that we spend just as much time on the consumer experience for people who buy your product or people who are members of your service as we do for the employees who are actually using the product. And so we have a very strong point of view on how to design products and how products should be really useful, but also really great to look at. And so we spend a lot of time on both of those sides of the house, where many products we've used in the past only focus on one or none.
Yeah, and in terms of design thinking, I know this one question was entirely intentional. So why not two? What's the importance of one?
Yeah, I think that what we found was that a lot of people get a lot of surveys, but not many people actually answer them. And so it's fine if you want to ask people lots and lots of questions, you'll just not get many people to answer you. And so we felt like that was sort of a broken situation. And so there's this very, very specific question of how likely are you to recommend us to a friend, and then allowing customers to share in their own words why they chose that score between 0 and 10. That is a really powerful way to get feedback from customers that is on their own terms. So rather than prompting them with a litany of questions that your team has come up with that you think are important, this allows you to get feedback that you may have never even known was on people's minds, and in a quantity that is much more representative of your actual customer base than just the few people who tend to answer 10 questions. Yeah. And so we see much higher response rates, sometimes 5-10x what people were traditionally getting. And we also have a really strong focus on making sure it works great on mobile devices. Over half of our responses come from mobile devices. And so traditional surveys are pretty bad on mobile devices, both from their design and the way they've been built, but also because they're not intended. It's not an experience that's great for a 10-minute interaction.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to click the little bubbles.
Yeah, exactly. They're just really tough, and drop downs with hundreds of options on a phone is a very tedious process. And so it just had to be rethought for the condition that what would it take to make surveys and an experience that we would actually want to answer ourselves. And that's sort of what the genesis for Delighted was working on our last product and needing really great feedback.
Yeah, so then give us the scoop. How can a brand optimize their question?
Yeah, so the best way is we just offer them one question, so they don't even have to do anything. So it's just the one question: how likely are you to recommend us to a friend, and then why did you pick that score? And so the customization comes from adding your brand's logo, adding your colors, and choosing who you're going to send it to. But the really hard part is not about asking the question. The really hard part is doing something with the feedback. And so that's the other part of Delighted that we spend a lot of our time on is, okay, now you have all this feedback. Most of the time it ends up, previously it would end up in an Excel spreadsheet on someone's computer. And so no one in the team would even see this feedback. And so you'd sort of be having to advocate, well, customers said this, or we got this survey result, it means this, and no one in the team had actually seen the real feedback, and maybe they only saw it once at a team meeting for one slide. That's not really a great way to ensure that everyone in the company is acting towards making a better product for customers. And so we wanted to make sure that that feedback was actually useful. So we have the ability to search through all of it instantaneously, so you could see everyone who's talking about shipping, or everyone who's talking about the app, or talking about customer service. And when they are talking about those things, are they generally more happy or less happy? And so you can really start to understand super quickly, without any technical knowledge, what are the things that our customers are most happy about, what are the things that need work, and then as we improve those, are customers noticing, and is it making a difference?
How do you guys do that personally at Delighted, implement user feedback?
Yeah, so we started the company about a year and a half ago now, and when we started, we were building it for ourselves first, and then we had one or two friends who were at different companies who were having the same problem, and that's sort of how we saw that this was bigger than just our own need. And we started working with them on a very, very simple version of the product, and we basically worked with them in person, in meetings. After, we'd give it to them, make some changes. I'd go have coffee with Michael, who's one of the guys, and or the folks at TaskRabbit, and they'd tell us, hey, this is what's working about it. These are the things that are still missing, and we just sort of kept working on those. And we obviously had a big list of things that we wanted the product to do, but especially when we were building a business product, businesses and the people who use them are usually really, really good at explaining what's most critical for them to even use it. What's sort of important that in the next period of time that they can imagine, the product would be a lot better if it had. And then what are some things that would be really cool if it did but aren't critical. And so we were just very ruthless about starting with a very, very simple product that just allowed you to send out to customers and get that feedback. There was no search, there were very few properties, there was no multi-user support. All these things that now the product has came after direct feedback from our own customers about what was most important to have the product be more valuable to them. And we've sort of progressed to all sort of talking on the phone with customers, and now over email with them, and we just recently opened up to any business so that they can sign up. But previously you had to put your email in on a wait list, and so that was a really fantastic opportunity for us to email people and say, hey, what are you hoping this does for you? Understand that, and make sure that as they started using the product, they knew we were always there to listen, and they could always give us feedback. And so it's sort of funny that we've always intended for the product to be self-serve, and yet in the way that we started it, it was actually a very one-on-one interaction with us and them, and yet it's led to the product, I think, being quite powerful and still true to what we wanted it to be. And yet I think that the other sort of interesting piece is that we now have a feature set that a lot of the things we wanted to do, but now we've done them in a way that we know customers will actually use them, rather than just a bulleted feature list that's sort of appealing but not actually used. We have a very high usage rate across all of our features because they were built with feedback from our real customers, and knowing that, hey, if you guys have this, I'll actually use it. We roll it out as a beta feature to them, and they actually start using it. So it's very different than just sort of pie in the sky. Wouldn't it be cool if... we don't have that many conversations like that. There's still a lot of block and tackling. And I think that's the other reason why it's taken us over a year to go to sort of being in private beta, is that the problem is actually very deep. And because companies have not had a product to help them with this, there was a lot of missing stuff. It was just a very big problem, and so it took a lot of time to actually build the product that would do it. But we feel it's now in a place where it would help a lot of businesses, so we decided to open up.
Yeah. So how much feedback then actually warrants the construction of a new feature?
Yeah, I think that it changes, right? So in the very, very beginning, when you have 0 customers, you have to go off of more of this was something we wanted to do, and now someone's asking for it, so let's just prioritize it. We plan to do it anyways, so let's do it and see if it's there, does this actually change their behavior or not? Sometimes people will just give you features to try and throw you off the scent or sort of placate you. Like they don't actually want to use your product, but the easiest way to say no is just demand some crazy feature.
Right.
So if you build the crazy feature and they still aren't interested, then that's a really good sign that they weren't that interested. So that can be wasteful, but in the beginning it doesn't matter because you have 0 customers anyways. So it's better to work on something that could work than just randomly. But as we've grown, what you find is that if you are serving a particular problem and sort of job that this product is trying to accomplish, then you'll start to see that people may have different ways of expressing it, but they're trying to accomplish the same goal. And so one good example of that would be people were taking all the feedback and taking it out and starting to categorize it because they wanted to know how many people were talking about this or how many people were talking about that. And we heard that a couple people were doing that through talking to them on the phone and over email. And what we realized was that we didn't have search. And so there was no way for them to actually, in the product, understand how many people were doing that. So they would take it out into Excel and then use the crappy search in Excel to do it and then tag it. And so we decided, search was something obviously we want at some point, but now is the time because we had, I don't know, maybe a third of our customers we found out were doing this. And so we went and invested the time in building a really great search. And then that then led into this idea of trends where you could then create a search and save it forever so that anytime anyone ever mentioned like app crashes, it would automatically put that feedback into this bucket. So we sort of solved it orthogonally because you don't have to tag it or anything. It just automatically goes in there. But now you have search, so you can sort of do one-off checks, but then you can also build these really powerful trends to track things over time. And so that's sort of, I guess, sort of how we think about features is it's what problem are we trying to solve here? How many of our customers have this problem? And if we solve it, do we think it's a meaningful enough problem that this will make a difference in their day-to-day use? Or is this just something like I want to, there's an interesting feature we added recently because we have international customers where on receipts for international customers, a lot of times they need to put in their full address and some information about their business that in the US we don't really care about. And so that feature was important, but only once we had enough international customers that I couldn't do that by hand. And so I was doing it by hand in our own PDF and sort of adding their information every month and sending it to them. And at some point that just became really inefficient for me to do, and so we built a very simple way to add a note to your receipt so you could put whatever arbitrary information you want on your receipt. Now that's not going to get anyone to sign up for the product, it's not going to keep them using the product, but it's important, and it's an important feature, but it's certainly nowhere near the same sort of thing like search. So not all features are equal, and it's a very sort of nuanced approach to understanding why are we doing this and why do customers need it.
I think it really lends to what you've been saying, Caleb, about that initial beta period where you worked closely with a few brands like TaskRabbit, like Bonobos, like Eventbrite, and you worked exclusively with them and in stealth. What do you think is the importance of startups doing that?
So I think one really important thing is that it helps you make sure that the product is going to work for the type of customer that you would want if you could replicate that customer. So we come from building products that care a lot about design. We care about design and the quality of an experience a lot. And we like companies that sweat the details. And so when we were thinking about who Delighted would most resonate for, we wanted to work with the brands that we loved ourselves. And so we tried to get them to use it. And in doing so, we had a group of customers who, while they had very different businesses, all sort of shared this very same sense that customers matter a lot, that the experience holistically is important, and that every single part of that experience for them is something we need to make sure is great. And so they bring that same personality to giving feedback about our product and also make sure that we don't do wacky things, right? One thing you could imagine is that if someone doesn't answer a survey, you should remind them, and you should remind them a lot because me as the business, I want feedback. Our customers didn't think that way because they knew that they personally wouldn't want to receive 5 reminders for something that they'd ignored. But if you're working with just totally random customers, it's very possible you'd get someone who didn't share that same belief. And so you'd be in this really tough conflict of, well, our customers want this feature, but we know in our hearts that this isn't something that's going to be good. And so by staying private, we were able to focus the companies and the feedback with the types of businesses that we would want to work with in the future, and who were trying to do well by their customers. And so we were just helping them do that, rather than this being a conflict of, they're asking for a lot of stuff we don't want to do. I think one of the other benefits of working that way was that we had a very close relationship with them. We weren't just some random homepage that they found through a Google ad or through some content marketing. They knew that we were there to help and try and make this product incredibly useful for them, and continue to do so, but making sure that it really works, because all of those other things about growth and trying to hack the system only work if your product is actually useful. And so by staying private and stealth, we were able to focus on the most important thing about making Delighted actually work. And consequently, it actually worked well enough that those customers would pay us. And so that money was able to fuel us to keep going and keep attracting more customers. And so we are taking a very long view on this. And I think when we have launched now, customers know we work with a lot of great companies and we help them, and we have testimonials from them, and we've been able to do a video with Bonobos and do profiles with other customers like Tuft & Needle and Munchery and others, and really let people know that we can help them, that this isn't just some speculative idea on a landing page, but we've been doing the hard work for over a year already.
Yeah, and so operationally, how did you get the most out of that year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing has just been, we're a team of 3, and so the most challenging part about a growing business, in our view, is that you end up doing a lot of things that don't matter to your customers. You have to worry about where you're gonna have your office, who you're gonna have help you with press, what you're gonna do. Sorry, there's
what you're gonna do about that?
What we're gonna do about our loud AC in our office, and so there's just a lot of marketing. How are you gonna market the product? How are you gonna do customer service in a scalable way? How are you going to make sure people's accounts aren't going fallow and their credit cards are expiring?
All the non-sexy things.
All the things that are important to a business, but don't move the ball forward for your customers. We've tried to ignore those, and by being private, we were able to sort of scale those at an appropriate pace, versus letting if we were just open, anyone could come in and we would just be totally at the mercy of what the urgency of the day was. But by being private, if we were working on a really core feature, we wouldn't invite new people, because that would require us to get on the phone with them and talk over email. And so we knew that at that point we wouldn't be able to do our best job there, so we would just focus on new features for existing customers. And so I think that the way that we've been most productive is by trying to minimize those distractions, and by focusing on making sure that the product is the thing we're trying to spend the most time on, because that's ultimately why people are using us. It's all these other things are important but not sufficient. The product is that core for us, and it's tough. But the other thing you can do is spend engineering time to make the processes more efficient. And so there's no way we would be able to support the customers that we have today and the number of them 6 months ago. But now our admin tools that I use all the time are pretty robust for the things I was doing all the time. And so I would do them 10, 15 times, and then talk with Mark, who's one of our co-founders and lead engineer, and we would work together to build a little tool. Take a couple hours, build that tool, and now I've got a much more efficient system. And you just sort of do that a bit by bit over time, and over a year you've got a pretty good system in place to bring on a bunch of new customers and have the same high quality experience that those first 5 or 6 had.
So for a startup who does choose to start private and go in stealth for that year or 2-year period, how can they manage to get press for their launch? Because you guys were able to successfully do that.
Yeah, so I think that the benefit and the reason you would be trying to be private would be to make sure that the product actually works. So the press wants to write about things that people are using and that will help their readers. And so if you have a story that we're helping XY company do this, then that's important. If you come out and say, we're just launching but we have no customers, then that's a much flimsier story. So I would be very cautious that being private is not a tactic. It's a result of trying to solve a problem differently. And so we weren't private because we thought it was sexy to be stealth. We were private because we knew we couldn't deal with the distractions of the outside world as a team of three. And also it just wasn't the thing we were most concerned with. That we weren't concerned with how fast we were growing necessarily, because we wanted to make sure that the product was still super useful for the few customers we had and make sure we could retain them. Because if those customers stopped using us after a month, it doesn't make any difference how many new customers we get every month. We won't have a business that works. And so I think it's certainly very dependent on the type of business. I think for business products, so B2B businesses, it can make a lot of sense to work with some pilot customers. But it just depends on the situation. I think consumer, much different story there. I would think that you're trying to get attention and try and get usage as early as possible. And so staying in stealth as a consumer service can be a little weird. The tricky part is if you're private but not talking to customers, that's a really dangerous situation, because then it's just your own team in a dark room by yourselves for years. That's a pretty that's a recipe for a lot of weird stuff to come out the other end.
Yeah, so I know you mentioned you only have a team of 3, so there must be a lot of obstacles, but how are you constantly challenging and supporting each other?
Yeah, I think that the hardest thing for us is that we've set out to have Delighted be the company that we always wanted to work at. And so what that means is then all of the things that, when you look back at why people made decisions in previous companies, when you run the company, you can rationalize a lot of decisions about maybe we should do this a little faster, or maybe we should ship it even though it's not quite good enough. And so I think that the way that we help each other is holding ourselves accountable to why did we start this, and knowing and being explicit about what we're trying to do. Sometimes we're trying to do something that's ambitious and crazy, and we know that we're spending more time on it than we probably should, but all 3 of us are okay with it, and that's one of the reasons it fulfills one of those needs for us. Other features are things that we just need to get done and are just sort of table stakes, and so we know that the bar is a little lower on those things, but ultimately we want to make sure that all 3 of us are pushing hard. And it's funny because no one wants to be the one to say it's good enough. And so that's actually kind of a challenge when you say we want to try and build really, really great things, is no one wants to be the one to say it's time to ship. And yet ultimately you have to. And so that's always a tough decision when you set the company up to be about quality. But that's sort of our own personal struggle, I guess. But it's definitely great having 2 co-founders who both have different skill sets, but we all have a very overlapping sense about why we're doing this and why this is important to help. Because ultimately, we use a lot of these services that we help, and we want better products, and we're very, very picky about the things that we like and the things that we think could be better, and are always nitpicking things. And so if we can help accelerate great businesses being made and sort of accelerate the demise of really bad businesses, that'd be pretty cool. So that sort of keeps us in check.
So on that note, Caleb, I want to end with, it's been a week since you guys launched. You've been tremendously successful so far, but where do you want to be this time next year when you're talking about Delighted?
Well, one is still around. I think
I don't think you have to worry about that.
Well, I think that what's interesting is that it's very easy to get confused about what's important and what's making your business go. Talking with people like you guys is awesome. It's a lot of fun. It's great getting to share what we're doing. But right now, if an email comes in from a customer, I'm not answering it. And so that is in the back of my mind. And we have customers who are excited about things that we're working on, and we want to get those to them. So are we still going to be able to work on those, or are we going to be spending time on other things? And so I think that just because we have customers, we need to remember that the way that we got here was not by doing lots of other things. It was by doing and building the product for our customers. So I would be really happy if customers that we had today were still customers, and that they loved us, and that they were getting more value out of the product than they were this time last year, that it's helping them more, it's making a bigger difference inside their business, more of their team is using it. That would make me really happy. And the number of customers we have and the number of employees we have is sort of irrelevant. All of that will come out of supporting that first goal. But I always find it funny when businesses seem to focus on, this year we're going to hire 50 people, or this time next year we're going to have X customers. That you don't control those things directly. Those are all outputs from the business working and from people outside the business saying, I want to use your product. So it's always funny that people don't seem to focus on that as much as trying to focus on building those outputs.
Right. Well, so hey, we'll let you get back to your customers, but so how can everyone get in touch with you, and how can they start using Delighted?
Yeah, so my email is just Caleb, C-A-L-E-B, @delighted.com, and you can sign up for Delighted at delighted.com and send out a test to some of your customers today. Start getting feedback within a few seconds of sending. And then we have plans that start at $25, so it's really affordable for any size business to keep a pulse on what their customers think, and really do what they were set out to do, was to build a product or make a service that people loved, and as a result paid the money to keep doing it and keep providing it. And that's sort of what we're all about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Caleb.
Great, thanks.